Hello, I'm Chuck Houston from the ALM Psychology program at the Harvard Extension School, and I'm joined here today with Dr. Adrian Turney and Dr. Dante Spetter, and we're here to talk a little bit about the ALM degree in psychology, and in particular, one major choice that students have, whether you're considering doing this degree at this time or whether you're already in the program and trying to decide if you're in the right track or not. We have a capstone track and we have a thesis track, and students can elect at the beginning, at the time of admission, which of the two tracks they would like to be in. And on occasion, existing degree candidates often change their mind. So the purpose of today's session is to join a discussion on what the two tracks are and what their differences are and which one might be best for you. So with that said, I will begin by describing some of the similarities. The degree is the same degree. It's not two different degrees. You get an ALM degree. It's a master's degree from Harvard University, in particular from the Harvard Extension School. They're both 48 credits. They both cost the same, result in the same degree, and those are the essential differences. The first 9 courses, or 36 credits, if you prefer, are the same, and the same format. You get to choose a lot of the courses. For example, you choose 1 seminar, you choose 5 courses. But when you get to about the 9th course, you then have a path that diverges, and one of them leads to a capstone track, and it is preceded by an additional elective, and then a course we call the Precapstone, and then the capstone. Those are your last 3 courses. On the other hand, in the thesis track, those last 12 credits, or the equivalent of 3 courses, is comprised of a tutorial in which you create a thesis proposal, and then an 8-credit thesis, which is a 9-month undertaking of independent research supervised by a Harvard faculty member. And so that's the major curricular difference. There's a turn that takes place about 3/4 of the way through the degree. And so I'm going to call upon Dr. Turney actually to step in next and tell you a little bit more about the differences of the 2 tracks and how you might start thinking about your journey.
Sure. Thanks, Chuck. So I'm going to talk to you for the most part about how to think about the capstone. I have taught in the capstone for a couple of years, but I also do research advising for the thesis. So I can kind of help you understand what the major differences are of that. And then I'll turn it over to Dr. Spetter, who will talk more specifically about the thesis. So the capstone, thinking about the difference between a thesis and a capstone, partly comes down to what kind of work you want to do for the last 3 courses or 3 components of the degree. With the thesis, it's more about answering a question, right? Do you want to know how something works? Are you trying to contribute to a larger explanation of some particular psychological phenomenon? For that, typically you develop a research question, you conduct empirical research, you write up your results and try and contribute to that larger explanation. The capstone is slightly different. It's more about applying what you've learned in your classes, in additional reading that you do in the fields that you're interested in, and applying that research to some problem that exists in the world. And so to be a little bit more specific about what I mean by that, I'm going to explain with respect to one of our existing capstone classes, which is on human development. So let's say, for example, you are interested in helping people reason about issues or educating people in some particular way. Maybe there are some elements of adult development or leadership principles that you want to help people understand more deeply. It might be that you want to create something like a program or create outreach materials that help people kind of move from one developmental level or understanding to another developmental level or understanding. And that maybe you want to create that in as much of an evidence-based way as possible. That's the kind of work that you might do in a human development class. where you're creating a capstone project. And so really the capstone and the thesis are allowing you to do different kinds of work with the scholarship in the area that you're working on. As Chuck mentioned, for the capstone, there are two components. There's a pre-capstone, which happens in the fall, and there's a capstone, which happens in the spring. So that's a year-long course. It's a year-long commitment to the project that you're working on. In the pre-capstone, the primary goal is to develop a proposal for the project that you want to create and carry out in the spring. It's a writing intensive class. It's a reading intensive class where you're really getting into the expertise, the research, the scholarship in the areas that you're interested in. Then in the spring, once you have passed the pre-capstone, your proposal has been approved by your instructor, you then create that project in the spring. And the way that it worked in the human development capstone is there were two components of that overall project. There was the project prototype. So if, for example, I was creating a professional development workshop for a particular group of people, or a curriculum that was intended to help people learn, deeper concepts in science or something like that. I would then create the materials, almost like a program manual on how to carry out that program. And that would be an example of a kind of prototype. Along with that is the academic paper that goes along with the project that explains all of the design choices that were made in that project. And that academic piece draws a lot on the literature. Why did you do this? If that is, the particular age group, the particular emotional kind of capacities of those individuals, about their conceptual understandings. So it draws a lot on human developmental literature as a way of creating a program that is kind of as evidence-based as possible. The way we often think about it is kind of a beta version. If you could create a beta version of a program, kind of the best foot forward before you start implementing that program, that's what the project and the capstone is all about. And I've had a number of students who, once they've created that program, have then gone on to actually implement it. And they do a lot of work afterwards to do that, but that's not part of the degree, that's separate. The capstone project itself is kind of contained within the class. I think there are a couple of things to point out about the capstone in the way that it's different than the thesis. The timeline is more predictable, absolutely. It starts in the fall, it ends in the spring. And it's the thesis is a little bit more adaptable to different timelines. It could be a little bit longer. It depends on what the nature of the research is. So it's more predictable, but it's also slightly more constrained. And I think that's an important decision to make, is whether you prefer more structure or more self-directed learning. If you prefer more structure, that's a good fit for the capstone. The capstone is 2 classes. It is directed by a syllabus designed by an instructor. The project that you do can't be any project that exists. It has to fit within the constraints imposed by the instructor. It has to meet those criteria. And let me see. And so it's a little bit more constrained in terms of thematic implementation, whereas the thesis, it's a little bit more wide open. You choose the topic, you kind of identify whether there are people at Harvard that might be able to support your topic, and you kind of develop that on your own. And so it's a little bit dependent on whether you prefer more of the structure or more of the self-directed components of it. A lot of times people will ask us 2 questions. One is, do I need to take the pro seminar even if I'm going to do the capstone? And the answer is yes, absolutely. So the pro seminar is a place where you learn about research methods in psychology in a particular area, so that you have an understanding of how research is conducted in that field. And that's essential whether you go on to do a thesis or a capstone, because if you're going to be a good consumer of the research that you would then want to apply to a particular problem, you have to understand how research is generated, how knowledge is created, and how methods within psychology work. So it's absolutely essential that you take the pro seminar, even if you don't necessarily intend on going on to your own research with the thesis. The other question we often get is which one is easier? And that's kind of there's not a good answer to that because neither one is easier or harder. Again, it depends on what kind of question you want to ask and what kind of person you are, what kind of learner you are in the context that you do best in, more self-directed or more structured. And so, it really depends on what you want to do with your degree. Afterward, do you potentially want to go on to do doctoral research? Do you want to use this as an opportunity to do some professional development work of your own? Talking with Chuck as your academic advisor, and then with either Dr. Spetter or me about what's a good fit is the best way for you to decide what's a good track for you to select. Just to give you a sense of what kinds of capstones there are at the moment, we currently have a human development capstone and one in identity. And there are a couple of more in development, and hopefully we'll be seeing capstones in psychometrics and potentially educational psychology as well. And then also to give you a sense of what kinds of projects are done in the capstone, I can give you a couple of examples from the human development capstone that I've taught in the past. So one of them was a program for people with diabetes to help support them in shifting their diet. And so it focused on habit change, it focused on emotional support in that process of making those changes. Another example was one for, it was a community outreach program, and the goal was to support the development of a STEM identity, so science, technology, an identity for students working in that area, in African-American students who are interested in pursuing careers in science. And so both of those are examples of the kinds of things that you can do within the context of at least the human development capstone. And there, as you can see, they're kind of applied in terms of kind of helping people and supporting them in developmental outcomes. So that's kind of an overview of the capstone. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Spetter, who will tell us a little bit more about the thesis.
Thanks, Dr. Tierney. So as Dr. Tierney mentioned, one reason students may consider choosing the thesis track is if you want to go on and continue your education to a PhD. PhD programs expect that you've done some research already and that you're going to spend a substantial chunk of your time during your doctoral work doing additional research. Another reason that people may choose the thesis track is some people come to our program with a burning interest in a particular area that really doesn't fit neatly into one of our capstone categories. There's something you really want to learn about. You did a little bit of work on it during your classwork, but you didn't get to go as far into it or as deeply into it as you were really hoping to do. And a third reason would be that you really want to take a more empirical approach. So Dr. Tierney mentioned developing various programs. Maybe you're looking at developing various programs and you realize that there are a bunch of them out there, but they haven't really been tested. Nobody knows which one's better or what makes an effective program. So there's lots of theorizing, but not a lot of evidence. So the point of a thesis is to take an empirical approach to finding the answer to a question that has not yet been addressed in the existing literature. It's intended to be something original, where in the case of the capstone, you're applying knowledge that somebody else has already acquired and maybe doing something novel with it or presenting it in a new way or to a new population. One of the questions students often ask us is, how do I do a thesis if I don't have a lab? Well, some of our students do actually join a lab and work in what I call the conventional graduate student model. So maybe you're here in Cambridge, or maybe it's online research and you join in with an existing lab at Harvard. Maybe it's in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences here on the Cambridge campus. Maybe it's over at Harvard Medical School, and you actually become a junior partner in a lab. You work on some larger project, and then you eventually take a piece of it. But a lot of our students are not able to do that. Either there isn't a lab investigating what they want to investigate, or the pragmatic realities of where you are geographically, your job responsibilities, your family responsibilities, it's just not feasible for you to make that kind of commitment. And in that case, many of our students design their experiments and run them completely independently. This might work, for example, if you're using game theory and having people do some kind of an online dice rolling game, or maybe having people react to brief videos that you can create and post. With COVID this year, many of our students collected their data online. And whereas historically I discouraged people from that being their only alternative. It was really great that people have been able to move forward and in fact get very, very creative in ways that you can do an experiment or collect some kind of data from actual human subjects using an online form. I should mention, anytime you're going to do anything with human subjects, you will have to go through the process of getting approval from the Committee on the Use of Human Subjects. I'm not going to go further with that today, but you need to have somewhere in the back of your head that that's going to be a step along the way toward a thesis. They're not going to allow you to do just anything, particularly if you're interested in children or elderly or disabled populations, anything considered a vulnerable population. Other students do observational studies. So they're doing empirical work, they're collecting data, but it's not a true experiment. So an example might be comparing how children in two different kinds of classrooms, a Montessori classroom and a traditional classroom, learn math concepts. Or another example, so you're not actually conducting the experiment, you're just looking at what's there. Or maybe you're using archival data, census data, data from various huge databases that are available on a national level to researchers to ask and answer your question. And there are pros and cons to collecting your own data versus using existing data. And as you go through the pro seminar and as you go through the crafting the thesis proposal process, you'll learn more about that. And I want to mention, people often get very frightened about the idea of a thesis, but we've had students do all kinds of projects very, very successfully. We've had students looking at why aren't middle and high school teachers doing social and emotional learning in their classrooms when it's all the rage in all the educational literature. We've had students do research. One of my students did a project where he looked at comparing the level of knowledge psychiatrists versus prescribing psychologists versus nurse practitioners have of psychiatric medications. Adrian, Dr. Tierney, what's an example of something one of your recent students did as a thesis project?
So one of my recent students did a project on examining whether moral judgments in children are influenced by reading stories about superheroes, and whether it could be superheroes kind of in the fictional sense or heroes in more of the everyday sense of firefighters, that sort of thing. So we're looking to see if their judgments in moral situations were affected by reading stories of that kind. So that was one of them.
So the point is that the thesis is wide open and you can pick almost any topic, with the caveat being that you do your thesis work under the direction of a member of the Harvard faculty, and we do not have faculty studying every possible topic. So we do ask thesis students to be mindful of what faculty are available. And again, that's something you would discuss with your research advisor as you move toward the thesis stage. The point is that a thesis is much more self-directed than a capstone. A capstone is 2 semesters. The thesis is a 3-semester sequence, but it's not necessarily three semesters and you're done. So there's a pre-work that you do before you enter the thesis proposal writing tutorial that involves identifying an appropriate research question, maybe having a hypothesis, having done some reading so you know you're kind of going in the right direction. Then we have a whole semester course to work with you on actually developing the proposal. That's coming up with the theoretical and empirical justification for your hypothesis and developing the method by which you're going to gather your data. And then you get 2 semesters or 9 months to actually conduct the thesis research, to go out, to get your data, to do the analysis of your data, and to write the whole thing up. So there's, and that may happen in exactly 3 semesters. Sometimes that takes people a little bit longer. I always tell people always say, well, I can get this done in 4 months. When you're doing research, something always doesn't go quite according to plan. I can't tell you individually what that thing is going to be or which stage of the process may take you a little longer, but I can almost guarantee that somewhere along the way, there's going to be a slowdown that you didn't anticipate. It may be personal, it may be academic. So if you really need absolute predictability, then a thesis may not be as good a fit. But if you really are very self-directed and have something you're really so interested in, so motivated, and it's really what you want to pursue, it's a great way to go. And we've had students successfully complete theses for the whole 30 plus years this program's been in existence. We talked a little bit already about the pro seminar and how do you need the pro seminar for the capstone? Another way to think about why we have you start with the pro seminar, that's the social sciences E100 course, is that it's really designed to teach you to read sources critically and to understand that different sources are designed for different purposes and different audiences. And even within the world of published and peer-reviewed research investigations, there are stronger and weaker papers, and you need to be able to think about that and know that. The Pro Seminar is also going to offer you resources for locating sources, how to search online, how to use the Harvard Library system. But most importantly, in my mind, the Pro Seminar helps you to set up your brain to think and learn like a graduate student. Many of the courses you'll take along the way will have both grad and undergraduate students. What's different is the brain you bring into that course, the critical thinking approach you bring into that course. And the Pro Seminar really gets you started thinking on that level. And again, going back to this question of which is easier, the one that's easier is the one that you're motivated to do, the one that feels right to you, the one that fits with your learning style. It's not that one is more work or less work. It's really thinking about what are my goals in doing this degree and how am I going to maximize the likelihood that when I graduate, not only can I say I have a master's degree from Harvard University, but I also have experience doing whatever it is that's going to get you ready for your next step.
Thank you, Dante, and thank you, Adrian, for that great overview. And so one of our goals in this session was to help you begin your ALM journey with the end in mind, and that's hopefully what we've accomplished. But my role as academic advisor is to help you make these decisions. So whether you're already in the program or if not, after you're admitted to the program, I can meet with you by appointment and we can discuss your individual concerns and individual interests. And I look forward to doing that. So thank you very much for joining us today.